which is on Northwest Coast masks and the connection between human being, masks, the spirit world, and nature.
Oh, I love that.
And it was actually through that I ended up getting into, my fascination with Bigfoot and Wild Man and those characters which I saw showing up in the native ceremonies and the potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest, where I'd actually see Bigfoot appearing, represented in a full hair costume in a firelit longhouse.
Mm. You can say then you've been a filmmaker for so long, you actually go back to the times when you were making things with film.
That's right. I actually trained on film.
Right.
Now, of course, we're totally digital. We're high definition. Recent production, people might have seen it was called The Real Lost World. We went on a hunt for Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World in Venezuela.
Oh, that's right.
And we scaled a 9,000-foot plateau, and we took, had 50 Pomone Indian porters to get us to the top, and cast and crew of 20, and it was a major production and really led to some exciting adventures and really the first connection ever. We were actually able to show how the not just legends but sightings by native Indian people in the region of flying reptiles, dragons, they called them dragons, coming off the top of the mountain, and ape men in each village that we went to had different stories about a Bigfoot-like creature in Venezuela.
That's amazing.
And this was the first time anyone has connected, these stories, which got to the British explorers, which they brought back to England. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes,
sure,
is sitting in the lecture hall listening to this stuff, and his mind is ticking away, and he comes up with the first fantasy adventure book of its kind ever. I mean, it launched, the whole genre of dinosaurs and people, and King Kong, for example, came out of it. Ultimately, Jurassic Park came out of it. And I wanted to show that it all came from this one place. Mm. And that's what we did. And we found other interesting things along the way as well.
Yeah. And you've been there, which is the neat part, too, then, because it's not just that. You've got a variety of these documentaries which takes you into various jungles and otherwise kind of scary places on the planet. And you've been to all these places. So let me ask you, what in your experience isn't possible? When you hear these stories and you've been to these places, have you been able to eliminate from your worldview things that you don't think are true?
Well, it's interesting because, when we did Monster Hunters, I kind of went out to look for, the whole realm of cryptozoology, it takes you from, like you say, the credible terrestrial or marine creatures to animals that should be extinct but maybe aren't, brand new species, and then you get into the realm of the supernatural and the demonic. And probably, when dealing with something, we dealt with the Jersey Devil, and not a lot of cryptozoological shows have dealt with the Jersey Devil, possibly because it does seem so outlandish. And yet, next to Bigfoot, it's America's best-known monster. And there's a national hockey team named after the Jersey Devil.
True.
The Air National Guard in New Jersey has a Jersey Devil as its official mascot insignia. It's a pretty intriguing phenomenon, and that place, the Pine Barrens, of all the places I've been to, also qualifies as the scariest place I've been to.
I've driven through the Pine Barrens a couple of times, and I was very interested in your doc on the Jersey Devil, partly because, and I think, although I didn't, I saw most of it, I don't know that I got to the very end, but there were, I thought, many more versions about the supposed origin of the Jersey Devil. There was one very specific one which you offered about the Leeds family, and I'd love to have you tell that story. But there are a couple others out there of how the Jersey Devil supposedly started, And in a way, some of the stories predated the arrival of white people into that part of the country.
Yeah, we kind of alluded to that. I mean, the thing about it is that it's easy because of the description of the Jersey Devil is basically a 250-year-old bat-winged, cloven-hoofed, horn-tailed demon that's pretty well fits our description of the devil in many ways. And so you tend to think, well, the Puritans who inhabited that part of the country in the 1600s and 1700s, they cooked this thing up. But as you say, there's stories going back to Native American references to the place as the Dragon's Place. They called this creature the Horned One, and that preceded white men getting there.
And I think that's interesting to me more than the cautionary tale of the Leeds family, where it's the mother who's been pregnant for the 12th time or whatever, and instead of feeling like it's a blessing, she curses the child and it comes out a demon.
Yes.
Attacks her, attacks the parents, then jumps out the window and becomes the Jersey Devil, which seems much more like a typical puritanical apocryphal story,
right,
to warn you against not treating every child like a blessing, or what happens if you have a birth defect, that it's of the devil or something. I mean,
well, what always appealed to me, of all the different monsters that we, covered in the miniseries, both the Chupacabra and the Jersey Devil, I kind of in my own mind started working out some possible explanations for it. And then there's always still a bit of a mystery note at the end of the day. But, with the Jersey Devil, for example, you said the deformed child. Well, there are tales of, this Leeds family actually having had a deformed child that was locked in an attic, that the child would only come out very, very occasionally, and if it was covered in this black cape. And so hence the wings, the black wings, and from the legend. And in those days, if you had a child that was deformed, the woman, could have been said to have been conspiring with the devil. And I think that's a really good place to start with the legend of where this might have come from. But that's the legend. It's the biological creature that people have been citing and continue to cite to this day. All through the 1800s, leading up to Phenomenal Week in 1909, where people across 3 states saw it, policemen shot at it, trolley cars in New Jersey, people cited this thing flying by trolley cars pretty soon they had armed shotgun riders on trolley cars in Philadelphia.
What year was that?
1909.
Yeah.
And there's even a very detailed account from a fire department who had the Jersey Devil in broad daylight trapped on the roof of a house and was using fire hoses to hose it down.
Right.
And in a kind of Ray Harryhausen movie moment, the water runs out and the Jersey Devil leaps down and they're throwing sticks and stones at it. And it's so detailed, and it's an official report by a fire department, in the modern era, the 20th century, and you're thinking, well, what the heck is this thing, and why would city officials bother to make such a report?
Well, and it pushes the idea of it being something which is cryptozoological as opposed to demonic.
Yeah.
That maybe that we're talking about here is some untyped species, and that it is different than a cursed, deformed child, which always still comes back down to, again, sort of this archaic way that people looked at birth defects.
Right.
As, somehow that this was a result of the sin of the parents or some such.
Yeah.
And I do think that's interesting, although always associated with this Jersey Devil is a kind of human-like intelligence or a super intelligence for an animal, a kind of sentience which is, bespeaks awareness of what's going on around it.
Yes. Well, I just want to add, similarly to the chupacabra, you have a perfect environment for the legend of such a monster to exist. I mean, when you go to the Pine Barrens, and especially if you go out at night, as we did with a group of monster hunters, you're walking through essentially trails and back roads from, revolutionary days in America. I mean, you can actually see actual roads from the 1800s, like dusty, gravelly paths that were once driven on by stagecoaches and that. It's a fantastic place. And as you're walking through the woods, you come across family plots and graves and forgotten towns from the 1840s.
Right.
This area was once industrial heartland of America before the steel towns of the north kicked in. So you had terracotta factories and glass factories and a major cranberry harvest there.
Sure.
So as you come into these little ghost towns in the middle of the night with moonlight streaking in through the trees, sometimes you find animal bones scattered in an apparent sacrifice on the ground. You find satanic drawings on the walls, and all the while you're looking for the birth house. The birth house where the baby was born is said to be the place where the Jersey Devil gets its power.
Right.
And there's a lot of theories about where the birth house is and if it burned down, and that's the quest we were on with the monster hunters, and something people still believe in.
To find the physical evidence, the environmental evidence of the Jersey Devil. And for people who have never been to the Pine Barrens, there's something about the repetition and the density of the Pine Barrens that leads you to this sense of creepiness that you said was probably the worst you'd had of any of your travels. Well,
and there's one other element I forgot, and that's the cicadas. And the background noise is louder than the Amazon.
The ambient noise of the Pine Barrens.
It's the split second the sun drops beneath the horizon. It starts up on a scale of 10. It's like about 7. So you've got this piercing, vibrating noise kind of pounding in your head as you're going through, and it's very, very dark because the woods are dense, and you've got graves popping up, and there's a definite feeling of creepiness when you're there. And like I said, the sightings continue, and the other fascinating part is that there are people that live in the Pine Barrens. They're referred to as the Pineys. They don't like that name especially. They're the original inhabitants. Some of Scott's Irish heritage, others said to be descended from Hessian mercenaries who fought in the Revolutionary Wars. And this story is their story in a lot of ways. And the people that we interviewed in our film, and not many people have interviewed the Pineys before about the Jersey Devil, and we did, and we even took part in a guitar jamboree, and it was a fantastic experience. And they describe a sound like a woman being torn apart in the swamps, and a sound so loud that they would come out at night with their guns loaded because they didn't know what the heck was going on. And the lady we talked to also cited the Jersey Devil flying over the trees. And, I asked her, was it a vulture? And she said, I don't know, buzzard. I know a buzzard when I see one.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting, I think that's a point that should be pushed too, is that there's something about the disparity. I mean, again, I'm pulling on my travels through the Pine Barrens myself, and there is almost, there's a horizon line at the tree level, which is truly just marks between light and dark. I mean, you have the sky up above, which is bright.
Yes.
And then once you get below that tree line, it is really dark.
That's it. You're right. It's really dark.
And so you really would notice something above the tree line. It would really stand below the tree line. Something could easily blend into that forest. But if it goes above the tree line, I mean, it would be like backlighting something so dramatically compared to what you would see underneath it.
Yeah, and there were just so many interesting elements to the story, and we really pursued it. We even had quite an amusing encounter with a local member of the SPCA who told us that at one point in the history of the Pine Barrens, people were releasing emus into the woods. Emus kept as exotic pets or on farms were being released into the Pine Barrens and could be an explanation for the Jersey Devil.
Except emus don't fly, right?
Right.
They're flightless fowl.
But imagine staggering through the Pine Barrens one late moonlit night and coming across a 6-foot-high bird.
Yes.
Looking like a dinosaur.
Looking like it was going to peck your face off.
Yeah.
As you came around the corner. Well, excellent. Well, let's leave it there for the time being. We'll come back. Peter von Puttkamer, the auteur of decades worth of documentaries out on the fringes, and we'll talk a little bit too about some of his work in the Native American cultures. Fascinating stuff, dealing with some of the hallucinogenics and some of the history of drugs, and also I want to pick at the chupacabra and the Yowies next as we continue our conversation. And we'll open up the phones next hour on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. I'd like to tell you, if you missed crypto news earlier, you can catch it right now on the website at coasttocoastam.com. Just go there and click onto where it said read Ian Punnett's blog. You go from there. It'll take you right to the website with all the crypto news stories. But we just talk about them. That's it. Peter von Puttkamer lives them. Crypto news with his research into cryptozoology, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. His series, The Monster Hunters, tracking 6 groups of people on a mission to find physical evidence of some of the most sought-after creatures, be they human or not, next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Of all of the creatures that you went searching for in your Monster Hunter series. By the way, did that run on Discovery? Is that where that ran?
Yes, TLC.
Right, TLC.
Yeah.
Of all of the creatures, the one I think I know the least about, or the one that I've only heard about more than read about, is the Yowie. And yes. That's the one, that's sort of the Bigfoot cousin in Australia, isn't it?
That's right. And actually, you can read quite a bit about it at yowiehunters.com. This is my friend Dean Harrison runs a group over there called the Yowie Hunters Australian Yowie Research, and they go on some pretty amazing expeditions there, full-blown trips into the not just the outback, but the bush, the deep jungle in Queensland, and also we were in the mountainous area outside of Sydney known as the Blue Mountains. And what was quite unusual about the Yowie, with Bigfoot, people are kind of, there are hardcore Bigfoot enthusiasts, and you get eyewitnesses, but in general, people are pretty shy about coming forward, and they're kind of embarrassed about it, or they're worried about their jobs. And in the case of the Yowie, we found an entire community that all had regular sightings of an 8-foot hairy ape-man running around in the woods behind their houses. We talked to several different people, including school teachers, ex-naval people, and they all described this thing in great detail. In the case of the one family, it was almost like Harry and the Hendersons. This thing would make regular visits, and they'd leave food for it.
What were they feeding a Yowie?
I think they were leaving. I'm pretty sure they were leaving hot dogs.
Hot dogs. Here's what interests me about what I know about the Yowie, and the only piece of this that always stuck out to me, sort of a little bit sideways from the reports of Bigfoot or Yeti, is that there are stories of native Australian stories, Aboriginal stories,
yes,
of them having battles with the Yowie. That there was a time when the Yowie were kind of a separate species, and I've never heard of Bigfoot battles where there's 100 Bigfoot on one side and American settlers on the other, but that apparently the Aborigines have, as part of their group memory, these legends of decisive battles between Yowies and themselves that may have decided who continued to evolve and who kind of ran aground, from on the Darwinian evolution scale.
Yeah. Well, I know, one big difference between Yowie and Bigfoot in general, other than a few cases where you hear of, I think there was once a battle we reported in Sasquatch Odyssey between a group of miners in a cabin near Mount St. Helens. And there was an all-night battle with guns being fired out of a cabin, and the Sasquatch is throwing large boulders onto the cabin. But in general, they're not that mean. But in Australia, they're actually quite feared, and it may go back to that Yowie tradition, as you say, with the Aborigines. They found headless bodies in the wilderness and this sort of thing, and things that have been attributed to Yowies. Even animals, large livestock actually found hanging up in trees, dead,
right,
and partially eaten, and this sort of thing.
And that makes you feel more like the Yowie, if they exist, and I'm willing to go with you on this, are much more of a Cro-Magnon-like kind of species of hominid than, say, Bigfoot, which has traditionally always leaned toward a more animal-like interpretation.
Well, there's always the two camps, right? We got into that in Sasquatch Odyssey quite a bit because the four Bigfoot hunters all discuss is it ape, is it human, but they still, people like Dean still believe that the Yowie is maybe descendant from Gigantopithecus, this large, 10-foot ape-like creature, which, bones have been found only 300,000 years old, which isn't that old, in China. And so it's believed that this could be Gigantopithecus. But, as you say, with the caveman idea, I mean, the whole idea of wild men and why wild men exist in cultures all over the world, one of the theories, sort of like dragons, and why dragons are in our memory in every culture in the world, is that it coexisted with other, primitive human species at one point. And certainly, we're a lot closer to Cro-Magnon than we are to Neanderthal, and the idea is that Neanderthal may be that other hairy human.
Right.
That was out there coexisting with Cro-Magnon for 60,000 years.
Right. But whether it's whoever it is, that Aboriginal story, that self-defining story of the Aborigines, that they were the victors. Even if it is exaggerated that it came down to one decisive battle, where there was all the technology of the Aborigines versus the hand-to-hand stone weapons of whoever it is that comprised the Yowie, that it somehow goes to, even if it's a microcosm of the truth, it sort of goes to this idea that at one time it was Homo sapiens versus Homo dead endus, where they just as a species they just lost, and that it comes down to us through this story of this titanic battle between the Aborigines and the Yowies.
Sure, you never know. It could be. I will say, as frightening as the Jersey Devil Pine Barrens woods were, walking around at night, I'd done some research on snakes in Australia, and I think people generally know that 7 out of 10 of the deadliest snakes in the world are in Australia.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I found out they were saying, well, you won't really encounter snakes unless you find yourself, wandering around the woods at night. And, of course, that's all we were going to be doing on Monster Hunters is wandering around the woods at night.
Right.
And so we knew there were these eastern brown snakes and these deadly, very toxic snakes that were going to be out there, venomous. And but what we hadn't counted on were the land leeches. And the old world, so in Asia and Australia, unlike here and in South America, where leeches are confined to the water, more or less, in Australia, especially Tasmania, if you're in the woods there and you stop, you'll hear this kind of rustling sound, and there'll be armies of leeches heading for you. And at first they kind of...
Armies of leeches?
Yeah.
Marching where? On the floor of the jungle?
Anything that stops in the woods gets attacked by the leeches. And you got to keep moving pretty well all the time. And I did a show on Tasmanian devils there, and the poor Tasmanian devils, they were live trapping them, and whenever they got to them, they were all covered in these leeches. And for humans, as I discovered, wandering around, and I had my big, tall snake boots on and all this, but I hadn't counted on a tiny crack in the sort of the tongue of the leather boot, and this leech was attached to my leg, and it was the size of about a 4-inch garden slug.
Get out!
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And it was at night, so pitch black, of course, because the Yowie hunters only work in pitch black with little diamond lights on their collars, and they just signal silently to each other because the Yowie will take off with any sounds. And they play kind of games of cat and mouse with the Yowie, and it will throw things at them and throw rocks and huge boulders and things at them. And so we're out there, and I noticed this thing on my kind of slimy thing on my leg, and I put my headlamp down, and there's this massive leech.
Ugh.
And I just touch it, and it drops to the ground and takes off, kind of like the thing in Alien, at great speed. Like it's like zooming along the ground, and I'm running after it. Come back with my blood, I'm
really
stomp on it,
Oh, I'll be darned. It sounds like the scene with the insects in the remake of King Kong, where they fall down into that valley and all of these giant insects come out.
That's right.
Attack them. Oh, that's amazing. Well, let me go back to the Yowie thing, though, because you said something. And again, Yowies I know least about. So without having seen the Monster Hunter episode on them, thank you for giving us a little bit more information about it. You said the Yowies are sensitive to sound, that they'll run away at the slightest sound.
Yeah.
What's the closest anybody's come to having any sort of documentary evidence, like a photograph, a recording, anything like that?
Well, there's a lot of, if you go to Dean's site, yowiehunters.com, you're going to see a lot of footprint evidence and that sort of thing. But, kind of like, Bigfoot, the actual image, other than the Patterson film, remains elusive.
Right. But, is there any Patterson-Gimlin film of this, of a Zowie?
There is not, no.
Okay.
There has not been a really definitive film shot on it.
How about Native American artwork, much like we see in the Northwest with Bigfoot?
Something, I've done so much work with indigenous people all over the world, in South America and in Indonesia and in all over with Native Americans, First Nations in Canada, and the Aboriginal people are very, very secretive about the Yowie, and if we'd had more time and several months, I think I could have possibly infiltrated secret societies over there to talk about it. But in general, based on my research and Dean, who spent his whole life in Australia, that it's very hard to get them to talk about it. And it's a little bit like, some of the, some of the legends of the Northwest Coast, and people are, they're sacred spirit beings, and they don't talk about them.
Well, speaking of sacred and these spirit beings, I was very interested in the documentary you did about peyote.
Yes.
And I watched that. I've never been a drug taker, or for that matter, even a drinker. So but I've known people who have done these types of sweat lodge hallucinogenic experiences, mm-hmm. and they talk about it as sort of life altering. And the ways in which your documentary worked on that, I thought were consistent with what some of my friends had been through. And I don't know. I just wonder did you go through it too as the filmmaker, or did you merely observe it as it was being done?
No. I mean, I was much too busy making my film to be taking any hallucinogenic plants, but we were able to film the native ceremonies in progress, and of course we don't just look at peyote, but we're looking at the story of how hallucinogenic plants came from nature, through the native peoples of the Americas, through this one ethnobotanist, this Richard Evans Schultes, who's been called the greatest plant explorer of the 20th century, and he's found like 2,000 plants previously unknown, and among them are poisons, medicines, hallucinogens, and he inadvertently became a father of the psychedelic era. This is a 2-hour special for the History Channel. It's going to be on April 20th. And
so that hasn't run anywhere yet.
It's brand new.
It's really interesting.
It's my latest production, and my friend Wade Davis is the star of it. He's a National Geographic explorer in residence, and people might know him from his book called The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Oh, sure, right. Oh, that was him. Oh, I didn't realize that's the same guy who started the reinvestigation of the whole voodoo thing.
Well, Wade basically, as a young man, was sent to Haiti by Richard Schultes, actually, to uncover the basis for how zombieism, how zombies are made.
Right.
And he solves the puzzle through these plants and poisons and medicines. They come up with this concoction that brings people to a near-death state. And the book Serpent and the Rainbow became
the movie
kind of
with,
a famous cult classic now. Wes Craven,
Martin Sheen,
Bill Pullman. Bill Pullman plays, but he basically plays Wade. So Wade.
Oh, wait! I thought that book also inspired the Martin Sheen movie, where he was dealing with a voodoo cult who was creating zombies too.
That's possible.
I didn't see the Bill Pullman movie. I like him a lot.
Serpent and the Rainbow is a Universal Pictures release, and in any case, so Wade's traveled the world, and as an ethnobotanist has ingested a lot of these hallucinogens with the native people as part of his job as a Harvard professor, and our purpose of our show was really, it's like an untold story of the psychedelic era. Like, how did this stuff come to the West? And while Richard Schultes is out in the jungle finding these hallucinogens, often by accident, a man named Dr. Albert Hoffman is in Switzerland, also using a natural substance, mold from rye, ergot mold from rye, and he creates LSD. In 1938, he first discovers it and then accidentally absorbs some through his skin in the 40s and takes a bicycle ride home in the first LSD trip in the 1940s. And so we kind of parallel the story of the man in the jungle working with native people, and this story of the man in the laboratory, and how it really, long before the hippie generation, it was poets, intellectuals, people like Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, people like Robert Graves, who wrote I, Claudius. These were the people experimenting with hallucinogens. It was not something a bunch of deadbeats did. It was really believed to be something that could transform society. And that's part of what we wanted to show. And of course, when Timothy Leary got a hold of it and dropped it wholesale onto an unsuspecting America, and what we tried to show in our film is that if you have a shamanic guide and you're going through this process with a person that can actually tell you what's going on, and you're doing it for a specific reason, and you're in a quiet environment, it's not particularly harmful. In fact, it can be quite beneficial. But what happened in the 60s is you had a lot of kids taking hallucinogens without any guide, without any proper setting, and all heck broke loose.
Yep. And you need the road man, as you talk about him in the documentary, the person who is the guide. We'll hang on to that. We'll come back to it. We'll give the numbers for other people to join the conversation we're having with Peter von Puttkamer as we're talking about his documentary series, Monster Hunters, and more. And I'll throw this question out to you now, Peter. Kick it around for a second. Of all the things you investigated, what do you think absolutely for sure exists? Of all of the cryptozoological creatures, whatever, what do you know absolutely for sure exists? Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. He is the captain of the monster hunters, I guess we could call him. Peter von Puttkamer has been in charge of this series that ran on TLC. He's got other work, too. But I want to go back to our conversation last hour in just a minute, and you can join in any way you want to in our last hour of Coast to Coast AM. And that's this. I started the interview by asking Peter all the different places he's been, of all the different things he's seen, what would he rule out as not being possible? I want to do it the other way around, and I want to see absolutely what does Peter von Puttkamer absolutely believe exists. And we'll find that out next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So we'll start there before we get to the phones for Peter von Puttkamer. What do you believe actually exists? You know, after investigating it enough to say you're willing to put your reputation on the line for what?
Well, first, just let me add that Monster Hunters DVD, you can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So if you're looking for it, what we're talking about tonight, you can find it online and on the website.
And still being rerun pretty regularly, isn't it?
It has been in the last couple of years, but best place to get it now is Amazon or Barnes & Noble and online. And on the links on your site as well through the website.
A well-produced series, well-directed, very entertaining.
Yeah, well, thank you. So my, okay, I have two answers for you. On the absolutely fantastic cryptozoological creatures, so I would include in that Jersey Devil and let's say the Yowie, let's say Bigfoot, let's say Chupacabra. The Cadborosaurus, perhaps not as well known as Loch Ness. The Cadborosaurus is the West Coast sea serpent. I think is quite credible, and I think probably exists.
The Cadborosaurus, to talk about that a little bit, because I think that also falls into the category of some of the lesser-known cryptozoological creatures.
He didn't get as good press as Loch Ness did in the 1930s,
or
and
Champ.
It's built from there. But what's fantastic about Cadborosaurus is that, what Loch Ness doesn't have is a whole lot of history beyond those early, sightings of them in the 20th century. But Cadbrosaurus has got an entire legacy of Native American tradition to it. So there's, for example, this is a sea serpent monster, whatever you want to call it, with this camel-like head and these humps that are like rows of tires. They've been described. We're talking about a creature 50 to 70 feet long, and we talked to commercial, float plane pilots who were, with another eyewitness who just about landed their plane on one, and this thing took off at high speed. The thing with the Native Americans, not just stories but depictions. You go to there's a lake called Sproat Lake on Vancouver Island, and these amazing petroglyphs right on the water, and you'll see creatures, creatures you recognize, like a killer whale and a crab and a seal, and then right along the bottom on the water's edge is this sea monster, this sea serpent that looks like all the eyewitness descriptions in the modern era of Cadbrosaurus. And, recently in another series I produced called Beyond Invention, we interviewed a former Navy diver who was out actually in a boat. He was out looking for crabs close to the shore, and this creature came by, and he described these humps as moving up and down, more like an inchworm than like a reptile, as a snake would swim across the water. And this kind of accordion, kind of inchworm way of moving has been described consistently by all these eyewitnesses. And the native people I've talked to, at one point, completely unrelated film shoot, and I was pointing to an island off of the Indian village, and I said, now that doesn't look like it's been inhabited for a while. And they said, oh, well, that was a sacred island. We've left it with no houses. It's all wooded because that's where our people went on their vision quest, and our young people would go over there. And the most amazing thing that they would be able to see on their vision quest were an actual sea serpent on the beach. And this what's really interesting is a Caucasian lady across the water, the island across the water, had told me she had seen this creature, this Cadbrosaurus, as a girl. We're talking about the 1940s. And it was very close to where the Indian people told me this is where the sea serpent came up on the beach. Another woman saw it on the beach that we interviewed. We also went out with a side scan sonar and got a massive blip about 100 feet down that, wasn't a whale. It wasn't a shoal of fish, and it was moving, and it was 60 to 70 feet long. Plus, people could go to Google Video or our Monster Hunters site, and you will see the Naden Harbor carcass, Naden, Naden Harbor carcass, pulled from the belly of a sperm whale in 1937. The best depiction, better than any Loch Ness photograph, 3 images of a creature with a camel-like head. I mean, it's partially decomposed, but you can see the fin, you can see this tail fluke that's very strange looking, and this kind of humped spine. And it's a juvenile, 12 to 15 feet long juvenile, and we interviewed the 85-year-old guy who was on the dock when they pulled it out of the sperm whale at the whaling station. So all of that's better evidence than Loch Ness, and I think there's something to this thing, and it's the best of all the fantastic ones I investigated, that one. And on the more terra firma-based creatures, I would say the Tasmanian tiger, supposedly extinct by 1936. This creature looks like a cross between a kangaroo and a wolf. It actually sits on its haunches and then and does an initial leap and then runs like a wolf. It has tiger stripes on its back. It has a 120-degree gape when it opens its mouth, more like a reptile than a mammal. And inhabitants, it's one of the stories in Monster Hunters, and people believed that it was a demon and that it was eating the organs of the animal and sucking the blood, and it was some kind of vampire. And so they exterminated it, and there was a government policy to exterminate it. But we've talked to enough people that believe it exists, have seen it, and I think it's quite feasible that that animal is still alive. There's pockets of them in southern Australia and in Tasmania, both of which I've investigated it twice.
Well, I could see why if it stood like a kangaroo, that it would appear bipedal and therefore start the rumors that it was some sort of demon. It actually rests on it has a massive, very peculiar tail. And again, you go Google video, you can Tasmanian tiger, or the thylacine as it's called, and you'll see it. There's footage from the Hobart Zoo. It's very sad. It's kind of sad to see it. It's like a sad little creature in a cage, you know. It's kind of like Frankenstein's monster. Everyone got the pitchforks and and that's one of the sad parts about things we don't understand a lot of times. And there've been similar to the chupacabra tale recently with this blue-gray hairless dog that was found out in the
Texas.
East Coast. Right.
Yeah, and they believed it was chupacabra, and, somebody trapped it, and it was probably a malnourished, hairless Mexican dog, and people tend to, want to go after these things, and a lot of time there's simple explanations or they're misunderstood.
But this one seems different. And let's get first-time caller line. Larry is in California on Coast to Coast AM for Peter. Go ahead, Larry.
Hi, how you doing, Ian and Peter?
Hi.
I was just kind of curious. The Skinwalker Ranch, they've set up surveillance there, and they've noticed that there was a hole that opened up and a creature would come out of that. And I was wondering if you'd correlated any of these other sightings with, some kind of wormhole opening up and these guys letting their pets out to play in our backyard.
Well, the paranormal explanation or other dimensional explanation for these creatures is something we, encountered quite a bit in our research. And, my own feeling about it is often the simplest explanation is the best, and that there may be real, even in the case of the Jersey Devil, like real biological explanation, everything from a sandhill crane to a previously undiscovered creature that we just don't know about. And I think in the case of things like Bigfoot, because people have talked about Bigfoot interdimensionally moving through time portals and what have you, and it's much easier for me to believe in a descendant of a Gigantopithecus creature still being alive in North America than, do you know what I mean? Like something that would be not of this world, so to speak.
Sure.
And that's my own personal feeling about it. It's just, scientists would still have trouble believing either, But sure. I tend to lean towards the terrestrial kind of explanation.
East of the Rockies, Ted is in New Jersey on Coast to Coast AM for Peter von Puttkamer. Go ahead, Ted.
Hey, how you doing? Peter, did you ever hear of a creature that was described as, humanoid with red glowing eyes that was sighted by the early settlers to the, the swampy bogs of Louisiana in the deep south of this country?
Well, my only, my knowledge about the creatures in the deep south is the, Florida skunk ape. And certainly, though that creature and its various forms, through Arkansas and in the Carolinas and stuff, that's been cited by a lot of people. And I think we're dealing with some kind of a ape-like creature there again. And the glowing red eyes fit, with other descriptions people have had of Bigfoot at night.
Yeah, the glowing red eyes thing, I've always found that interesting, and that was also true of the Yowie, too, wasn't it?
Yes.
The glowing red eye thing?
Yes.
But that is less of a problem for me, knowing the number of times that I've had to go back to the film processor and take the glowing red eyes out of my photographs I took of my kids or whatever. But that tends to pop up on lenses and photographs, and something about that part never seems all that bizarre to me somehow.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The best cases that I heard of, I mean, that makes me pretty much a believer in some kind of a Bigfoot, is the state trooper that we interviewed when we did Sasquatch Odyssey in Oregon. It was a friend of Peter Burns, or one of his early contacts, and he, this is a guy that he hadn't told anyone about it, and 20 years, it happened many years ago, and he never even talked to, I think his wife was the only one who knew about it, but this is a guy who was a game warden, and a hunter, and he encountered a creature down at a creek that then he thought it maybe was a human in distress or something, and then it climbed up the bank, a gravel bank that would have taken a human scrambling on, with his hands and on his knees pretty well to try and crawl up the gravel bank. This thing just cleared it in a few steps, stopped, and he looked, and he knew it wasn't a bear, and he smelt this skunky odor, and he looked at the eyes, and what he said about the eyes were the eyes did not shine like a night creature, like he would expect a nocturnal animal to be. And so then he thought it was more human-like. It wasn't, a some other animal that's used to being around at night, or cat-like creature or something. So, and then it crossed over the road, and he just described it in such a matter-of-fact way, without embellishment, that it was like the most convincing story I ever heard. Bigfoot encounter.
It's a wild card line. Brian is in Texas on Coast to Coast AM for the Monster Hunter, Peter Von Puttkamer. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, guys. Hey, I remember that Texas thing that he was talking about the dog and everything. I don't remember what happened with it, but I was just going to ask him if he ever heard of the Sabine thing over on the Sabine River, borders Louisiana and Texas. I had a good friend of mine that had a lease out here in Carthage. And he's the type not to believe in, Bigfoot or anything like that. His dad is a ex-Marine, Purple Heart. His uncle was an ex-Marine, and all taught him the same thing, to be a Marine. And he didn't know what fear was, but he told me he was out on the leash one night or one evening, and he all sounds were quiet. Wasn't even a cricket moving, and out of nowhere he just hears this loud screeching, just ear-busting noise from an animal or a creature, and he loaded his rifle, was waiting for it to see where it was, but he couldn't see nothing, and he said, "I'm out of here," and he jumped down. He was gone. But during the process of him leaving, he said he felt like he was being followed by it, and this just nasty odor was all around him. And I did a little research after he told me about it, and come to find out there was a lot of sightings on it, all down to the Sabine River. And I was just wondering if your guest knew anything about it.
I'm familiar with the story, but I don't know a lot of detail about it. But I mean, it just certainly sounds, very very much like a story. I mean, it sounds like the state trooper and his description, and this. I mean, there's a reason they call it Florida Skunk Cave. The Skunk Cave is because of that smell. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, that seems right in line with other sightings of that type of creature down there.
Well, I mean, I wanted to go out there myself and take a look and see if I could find it, but, after I was thinking about it, I was like, nah, better not. I might not like what I find.
If you ever put together an expedition, make sure you contact Peter. You could end up as a monster hunter on one of his series.
Yeah, I should look into that one. That sounds good.
Yeah, because and thank you, Brian, because you use, the monster hunters it's not like it's not like Scooby-Doo where it's just like one group of kids in a van going around the country. You have different groups of people who are already dedicated to that particular pursuit.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there are groups of people. I think that's one thing the general public doesn't really know is they tend to dismiss the whole thing is kind of a tabloid joke or something. But the fact is that there's a lot of people who devote their lives to this, and they go about it in as scientific a manner as they can. I mean, they're out investigating, looking for proof. They're, bringing the best technology they can to bear, and it's getting better all the time. I mean, now you can, the night vision equipment you can get is fantastic. And in Australia, virtually all the creatures are nocturnal there. So they go out with these massive infrared beams that light up at night the whole forest in front of you. And, you can get some amazing images that way.
Well, and that's just where we'll pick it up, too, coming up in just a moment with Peter von Puttkamer, the producer behind Monster Hunters, as well as other well-known documentaries appearing on the History Channel and TLC and the Discovery and a bunch of others. And I really encourage you to go take a look at what he was talking about, the Cadborosaurus. If you haven't Googled the images of the Cadborosaurus, you see what he's up to. I could sure see why that looks likely. But where are you going to take this conversation? Join it next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Heading into our last half hour with Peter von Puttkamer, who is the documentarian behind so many well-known series on cable involving cryptozoological creatures, as well as some of the other fringe experiments that Peter has documented. Looking forward to continuing this conversation next with you all on the phone. And I really recommend, going back to those two things that Peter said, if you went to Google Images, they do have the Shoemaker's Village photograph of the Cadborosaurus, which, while, not definitive, because this thing that they yanked out of a whale's stomach was partially, I guess you could say, partially decomposed and partially digested. It really is interesting. That camel-like face, as Peter described it, this is the creature that he believes is probably the most likely to exist of all of the cryptozoological expeditions he's been a part of. And I could see why he would say, you see that kind of a photograph and you think that is a lot closer than they've ever gotten with Nessie, but it might even explain Nessie. For that matter, Champ in Vermont, we'll come back to you coming up next and find out where you wish Peter would go and what he would document for you next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. But I also went to go look at some of those images of the Tasmanian tiger, and boy, you're sure right about that jaw extension. That would get your attention if you're out walking in the woods and you saw something like that looking at you, panting. Let's go west of the Rockies, where Jim is in San Francisco for Peter von Puttkamer on Coast to Coast AM. Jim?
Hey, Peter. Hi there, Ian.
Hi.
I wanted to ask Peter this. I know you're using infrared, but are you guys, when you're doing the infrared deal, are you using digital cameras to record it? How are you recording the infrared image?
I don't know that it's, it's definitely not thermal imaging, but it is what Sony calls night vision. Sony builds the best, consumer/prosumer version of that. Until you get into the military kind of, or even hunting scope type imaging, and they tend to be kind of very green and very grainy. And
right.
So the night vision actually works extremely well. And if you can add to it, back in the day, I used to have just a little, even a little thing that Sony supplied for the consumer cameras that extended beyond the, say, 15 feet of the average camera, extended it to 90 feet, and I shot an owl at night in the pitch black in the Puerto Rican jungle with this thing, and it was pretty phenomenal. So with the added, battery-powered infrared beams, you can literally light up hundreds of feet in front of you. And
have you tried just setting up certain stations and leaving them there for long periods of time for the Bigfoot stuff or the? I personally haven't, but other people have.
the Jason Walton of the Caddy Scan that we worked with. I mean, he set up cameras at all the likely places where the sea serpent was going to pop up, right? And I mean, one of the hardest thing with any of these creatures, like motion activated is the best way to go, but it's tricky. I mean, even photographing tigers and things like that, you know, they're not doing it with video; they're doing it with flash photography, because you pretty well, like, when are you going to start running, right? When does it activate? You know, the surveillance type cameras can run for quite a long time, but it's very tricky to photograph things that are passing by.
Jim, I appreciate that question. I think it's a real good one, though, too, and it brings up one that I had wondered about, too, about bait. And how do you, I mean, when you're setting up a camera situation, you're trying to capture something, at what point, I mean, if it's hard to predict what will attract what, isn't it? And we don't exactly have like some sort of hormonal scent from any of these cryptozoological creatures to spray around the base of the tree either.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point, but they kind of do. In the case of Bigfoot, again, the show I did called Beyond Invention, we went out with Rick Knoll, who's pretty well known to the Bigfoot world, and Rick had a pheromone scent that was produced by I believe he was a veterinary person with access to zoo animals and got the scent from gorillas. And they were using gorilla pheromones in these little scent patches to attract Bigfoot and to come to where the cameras are at.
Okay, wait. Did it attract Bigfoot to the camera?
Well, it all depends on your interpretation of the photos, and Rick has some pretty interesting shots. It's extremely smelly. Smells like old socks. So I think it would drive the humans away. But apparently it's attractive to gorillas. But then we don't really know if Bigfoot are exactly like gorillas. So
that'd be my point, is that may be the same as putting up, say, pheromones for us of a cow.
Right.
You know, I mean, we can smell it, but does it make you go, who? You know, does it make you go swing and go into the woods to try to find it? You know, I don't know. I mean, but then I guess food is problematic too, then, isn't it? Because then you're going to attract a million things, and it may not have anything to do with Bigfoot. Yeah,
well, probably the most famous recent case that we also did some filming on was the famous the Skookum cast, and they went out and actually some of these guys leave. I've watched Bigfoot hunters leave everything from cans of tuna fish, apples, bananas. And in the case of the Skookum cast, they left a little bowl, you know, a bunch of fruit in the middle of a muddy patch of ground. And this creature, what they ended up finding was the best cast evidence ever of basically a hominid lying on its side, stretching out its arm, and they have a perfect ankle joints and so on depicted in this muddy cast, and they got that by putting out fruit.
I think I remember that. I want to say that was in the Jeff Meldrum book on Sasquatch.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think he was part of that research as well.
First time caller line, Rob is in California on Coast to Coast AM for Peter Von Puttkamer. Rob?
Hello, good evening, gentlemen. I'm calling regarding you're mentioning about the alleged chupacabra that was in southern Texas that you said was a malnourished dog, and actually it looks to me like a Xolo escuincla, which is the true Mexican hairless dog that the Aztecs used to have. And they're not like miniature. They actually weigh in like about 40 pounds. And the reason that everyone talks about them having really bad, hillbilly teeth is that it's linked with the gene that determines whether or not they're going to have hair. So the fewer teeth they don't have. But I happen to have two of them sitting over here.
You happen to have what?
Two of these Cholos Squinklies, these two alleged chupacabras that people have been seeing in southern Texas.
They're your pets?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. How are they as pets?
Oh, they're great. They're actually known as the healing dogs because they're like little hot packs. If you're ailing somewhere, they just seem to know where it is. They just kind of park their body there, and they're pretty cool, actually.
That's great. Well, I agree. I think that it looked to me like one of the Mexican hairless dogs that was in really rough shape, and people had never seen anything like that in those parts. So I guess that's why they were freaked out a bit.
Thanks for the comment. And east of the Rockies, Mike is in Kentucky on Coast to Coast AM for Peter Von Puttkamer. Mike? Mike, are you still there? Hey, go ahead, Mike. And it doesn't look like he's there. John, wildcard line in Ontario on Coast to Coast AM for Peter Von Puttkamer, documentarian and producer of Monster Hunters.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, that's great. No, I'm just a little bit nervous. I've listened to your show for years, and right off the bat, I've been hooked. But I'm just phoning about something I've never heard reported on your show, a weird little thing. I live out in the country from a town of a population of about 40,000. I'm about 7 miles outside of town. You can take the highway home to my place or the back roads, and I took the back roads one night after visiting a friend, and then you come to a four-way stop, and I saw this little thing walking up the road, just perfectly straight, swinging its arms a little bit. I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen them. We've got, I've had them right in my yard and everything here, but so I drove right up on top of it. I've got a Chev Safari all-wheel van, and I drove within 2 feet of this thing, and I'm looking right at it. It had something under its arm it was carrying. I don't know. I just remember it was yellow. It turned around, and it gave me I had the windows up, so I didn't hear anything with the motor, but I don't know whether it growled or not, but it made the expression like it was. All the teeth were pointed. The eyes were yellow, because I'm only like 8 feet away from this thing, and the pupils went straight up and down. So I kept nudging closer to it, and I have one of these Sony cameras that Peter was talking about, and another one too, and I always carry them, and for some reason I didn't this night.
Oh!
Yes, because this thing, it's right there, and I got my high beams. I could, you could count the hairs on the thing almost, but the whole thing was covered in hair. It walked perfectly upright. It had just small ears. Everything's furry.
How tall was it?
It'd be about 4 feet.
What do you think it was?
It just reached the top of my hood. Its eyes. What were you going to say?
I said, what did you think it was?
I thought, like, it was between 11:30 and quarter to 12 at night. I thought it was a little kid. And I thought, well, what would a little kid be doing walking down? This is, the next set of houses is quite a while away. And why would he be walking down a side road?
What did you think it was carrying under its arm?
I don't know, but it was yellow.
Yellow under his arm? Could it have been a newspaper from a visit to an outhouse?
Yeah, I know. This is what I'm getting from neighbors. It's like, what did you have to drink and how much medication, all this kind of thing.
Right.
No,
yeah, but we're not asking. But it is a curiosity, though. The idea of carrying something, that doesn't come up every time in a discussion about Bigfoot.
No, that's what I'm saying. I've never heard something like this described on your show before. But two, I kept creeping up on it, and I was going to get out. Anyway,
did the face
I knew it wasn't there, and
did you see the face?
Pardon?
You had a pretty good look at the face?
Yeah.
And
it didn't have a snout, like a bear or a dog or anything like that. It had more like a human face, that shape. But it didn't have a nose like ours.
My brother's got a snout.
It was flat. But what was weird, though, it walked to the side of the road, which was gravel. There was no ditches, no shrubbery, no nothing, so nowhere to disappear. I saw it take one step, that leg disappeared. It took another step, the whole thing was gone.
Well,
it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Keep that camera handy. Don't let that happen again. And
wow, that's quite a story.
I'd like to see and or hear anything like that. It does remind me of something I wondered about. Have you ever done anything on the man dog sightings of the upper Midwest?
No, I haven't.
Are you familiar with the stories of this? That this creature that, I mean, there are a lot of different places where this comes up, but it seems to be concentrated in a band around the Great Lakes. And it isn't werewolf in the sense of anything that people think, is transformative or anything but that it doesn't morph, but that it has been seen by some people along roadsides in particular. And it is unusually tall, but instead of looking bear-like or ape-like, it looks dog-like. No?
Well, I'd be curious because, of course, you have that loup-garou legend in that neck of the woods.
Right.
That probably came from France and then went through the voyageurs and then came and traveled all the way down to New Orleans. And I think there's probably tie-ins with Indian Manitou legends and what have you. But I don't know what I don't know an awful lot about the sightings themselves.
Well, take a look at if you ever get a chance to. Linda Godfrey has a book out. We've had her on the show several times, and she's a very active hunter of the man dog, and she goes on these expeditions regularly. I mean, that is something that she would do next week, and the phone rings all the time. Her book is Hunting the American Werewolf, and we've had her on the show several times, and this particular host is blurbed in the back of the book just to show you how important a tome it really is.
Well, I did want to offer up my theory on Chupacabra, which I alluded to before, at least in regard to Puerto Rico. When we were there, and that island is a perfect recipe for a monster because you have native Indian legends, Taino Indian legends of Mosquito Man that used to go around at night with a long mosquito-like appendage drilling into people and sucking blood out of them. Then you've got all kinds of Navy bases with military installations, people driving jeeps out of mountains, underground bases, and what have you, all kinds of reports like that. And, a healthy dose of Roman Catholicism thrown in there, sort of like the voodoo,
like Santeria or some of the other.
Yeah. And so my theory on it is that in terms of this flying creature with the bright red eyes that people see, I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility that the U.S. Army could be testing flying robotic craft at night in the jungle and in the rural areas.
Well, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of the show, and I was hoping to see if I can get real quickly. Hey, Mike, east of the Rockies, do you have one quick question? Got to be really fast here, though, Mike, because I know you were on hold for a while. Mike?
Yes, Ian. You there?
Got to be quick.
Okay, Ian. I was wondering if you've ever heard of any smaller creatures. Anybody discovering any smaller creatures? My question is actually when I was a kid.
Okay, no time for this, I'm afraid. Smaller creatures. That's all we have time for. But Peter?
Yes.
Smaller creatures, like...
well, of course, there's small wild man stories, like Little Men, exist all over the world, and most recently that was corroborated with the Hobbit Man in Indonesia, Flores Island, where they found, remains of very recent tiny humans, 3 feet tall, that corroborates native stories of wild men, small wild men.
And we'll know more, I'm sure, in the upcoming additions to Peter von Puttkamer's documentary work. Thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your explorations and your expertise. And I look forward to being able to get caught up with the ones I haven't seen. You can order your own copies of Monster Hunters online. Thank you so much, Peter, and for your patience earlier and getting on late on Coast to Coast AM. Deus Te Amat. And I do.